GameSpot presents the Hotspot. It is Wednesday, February 1st. My name is Tom Agrino. We have an excellent show for you all today, mostly because we have Kevin Van Ort here.
Wow. Mostly?
Mostly.
Wow.
Mostly.
I can't live up to that.
We also have Maxwell McGee in the house.
Howdy doody. That's my intro. That's all I got.
It's a little.
I'm no Kevin Van Ort,
a little
I
down
can tell you
south,
that.
but it works. And Tom McShay, of course.
Hi.
Tom McShay is here.
I'm here.
So we have three very different games to talk about today.
From three very different people.
From three sort of different people. One of you has long hair, one of you has short hair, and one of you has no hair. And I have beautiful hair, is what I have. But no, so the games on the docket today, Final Fantasy 13-2, NeverDead, SoulCalibur V. I know, I'm sorry, you have the beautiful hair.
I think
you do have the claim to the beautiful hair. That is bad on me.
Right next to him.
You bring your brush. How does that even happen?
Everywhere. Look,
you're 25 years old. How do you carry around a brush everywhere you go?
They jump out and they're like, Max, you gotta go get on the camera and
How
shoot the interview.
demented was
And
your
my
mother
hair,
to instill you with this
and I'm
vainness?
like, oh no, I need a hairbrush. Boom, got a
Let's go
hairbrush.
crazy with it. Can you just go crazy real quick?
I can't. It
No, come
doesn't.
on.
I've trained it well.
Oh, okay. Anyway, NeverDead. Tom McShay, you have played
Sentient.
NeverDead this last week, this week. Not so good. Fairly decent.
I had a good time with it. Has some pretty
I heard
good
it was a
problems.
really good 6.
A really good 6.
Quality 6.
Quality
The
6.
interesting thing about NeverDead is it's a brand new IP from Konami. The guy who is leading the team used to be on the Metal Gear team.
Metal Gear Acid.
And he was working with Rebellion, who used to do like the Star Wars Battlefront.
They have a history.
They have a history. But so this is a completely different new game. It has interesting death mechanic. An innovative death mechanic, perhaps.
You can't actually die. You're never dead. You're an immortal being.
Right.
But you lose your limbs.
Right.
Arms, legs, heads pop off, and your head can be eaten. And if it is eaten, you can fail a minigame, and then it's like a fail state if you fail this minigame. But you're not going to die in this game, basically.
And it's interesting because it's not just a hey, we're going to keep you alive, the player alive, so they're not frustrated. Sometimes the death mechanic actually is almost a puzzle mechanic, where you have to dismember yourself in some way, and then to get past a certain area.
Yeah. I mean, you roll through air ducts, or you throw your arm into a pack of demonic wolves, and then like you blow up the arm like dynamite. So it's like there's stuff like that, little puzzle stuff.
So I feel like it's fairly safe to say pretty innovative mechanic.
It's definitely different than any third-person shooter I've played.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
how does it handle like tension or risk? Like if you can't die,
we're not going to get.
We're not
Hold on.
talking. We're not talking to you.
Yeah.
I thought we were talking.
All right, Maxwell.
Like this whole
if
thing
you're
he
going
wants
to
to do.
interject yourself into the conversation, we're going to talk about SoulCalibur now. So this game is on its
That's
fifth.
what you get. Now you have to talk about your game.
It's on its 5th installment.
We're just like blitzing through this quickly.
Can
Okay.
we
we'll do it.
conclude
No,
the
here
crappy
we go.
PSP and Wii versions? It's the 7th installment of
Okay,
SoulCalibur.
fine. It's the 7th installment. Did SoulCalibur 5 do anything innovative?
So SoulCalibur 5 did some things that were new for SoulCalibur, not things that are necessarily new for fighting games as a whole. SoulCalibur 3, SoulCalibur 4 both felt pretty similar to SoulCalibur 2. I know 4 had some sort of like crazy, sort of fatality system a la Mortal Kombat where you could, if you fulfilled all these wacky conditions, it was very hard to do. You could execute your opponent in a one-hit kill, and it was a flashy light show. And basically nobody ever did it ever. So in SoulCalibur 5, they tweaked it a little bit so that you still have these flashy cinematic attacks. They're called critical edge attacks now, but they're much easier to do, and obviously they're not one-hit kills. They're sort of like a super or an ultra in a Street Fighter game. And then in addition to that, you have brave edge attacks, which are enhanced versions of your normal attacks and allow you to pull off combos that aren't otherwise possible.
So in short, this game doesn't advance the fighting genre in any way, shape, or form, but it's good it's a step forward for the SoulCalibur.
Yeah, it's a step forward for SoulCalibur, and it takes established genre mechanics and conventions and executes on them very well.
Okay. So, and then moving on to Final Fantasy 13-2.
All right.
This genre this series is just older than Jesus, basically.
True.
It's been through 20?
I remember Jesus being a big
It's
fan
many.
of Final Fantasy.
Many iterations.
Many.
Did 13-2 do anything... did it do anything different from 13?
It did quite a few things different from 13 in the sense that it opened up the exploration. It gave you, it wasn't just linear progression like Final Fantasy 13. It opened up the exploration. It also has this interesting monster mechanic where your third party slot is made up of monsters that you collect, and it sort of has this Pokemon thing where you collect monsters and then level them up, and then that's your third party slot. Whatever, and you. Well, the way the game works too is like the battle mechanics. You switch between these different sets of roles, so you switch out different monsters during battle as well. So that's the thing that's most interesting.
The battle mechanic with incorporating the monsters.
Yeah.
Okay. So pretty much, and then as far as like the JRPG genre, it pretty much adheres closely to that type of game.
Yeah, I mean, there's little in Final Fantasy 13 too, aside from like maybe that monster stuff that you haven't done a zillion times before.
Right. So I'm curious, as far as innovation goes, how did the inclusion of innovative mechanics aid the experience, or the disinclusion? Is that a word? How did that aid the experience?
The disaddition.
Did innovation help your game be better, and did the lack of innovation help your game be better or make it worse?
I mean,
who wants to start?
I
wrote an editorial about this today, largely focusing on a lot of games that aren't innovative are also really polished because they don't do anything new. So those games generally get higher scores because there's nothing mechanically, structurally wrong with them. Whereas something like NeverDead it's really new and it's really different and it's really janky because of that.
Right.
Because they don't have time to focus on all the stuff we take for granted. So
what kind of jank did you see?
Oh, well, they couldn't figure out how to do difficulty.
Oh.
At all. I mean, because you can't die, so when they try to make it hard, it just gets frustrating.
Okay.
And then it's things just like the camera's not great and stuff like that. So I mean, it's not as polished as what you'd get when you play, another third-person shooter like Gears of War or something like that. So that's kind of, I think that's the compromise you make when you make something innovative, because there's not many polished, innovative games outside of Vanquish.
Right.
It's like the only one I can think of.
But it does happen, and that's the thing. Like isn't that kind of the holy grail of games for us? Is something that's different and awesome and very, very playable at the same time.
It's very rare that a game is able to like do something really unique that we haven't seen before and nail it.
But we talked about Vanquish earlier as maybe a good example of a game that did something
we always bring
really
up Vanquish
different
on the show,
but was also extremely polished. But even going further back, I mean, I look at something like The Sims or something like that. The first Sims was absolutely playable, and also very different. I mean, it was groundbreaking in its day. But sometimes I think that there's not necessarily an excuse. I mean, a lot of the thing is like all the money that gets pumped into games is going towards games that's essentially stuff that's been done before, right? The people that are more likely to think outside the box are the smaller developers and the stuff that, maybe try a little bit harder to do something different, but don't necessarily have the resources to execute. I don't know, like I think maybe Obsidian as a developer that kind of constantly does that.
Yeah. All of their games.
Super ambitious most of the time.
Ambitious, great ideas, fundamentally flawed in some way, but totally worth playing.
And there's no in between with them, because then you get something like Dungeon Siege 3, which was pretty polished, but was super uninteresting and short. And it's like, I almost kind of wish that they were a little bit more like BioWare in the sense that Tom might disagree, but because I want developers out there to be thinking super ambition. But on the other hand, like with Obsidian, like they bite off so much more than they can ever chew, and that gets really frustrating.
I would much prefer. We need people like.
I do agree.
We need people like Obsidian. We need some games like Alpha Protocol. Like even though it failed in so many ways, it is the best.
Or NeverDead.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
really.
NeverDead. I mean, I get so sick of shooters that are the same old, same old. I had a lot of fun with this game. Like it's cool. It's fun. Like why we need stuff like that. We need developers willing to take a risk because someone else is going to rip off the idea and then polish it because they actually know what happens. The groundwork has been laid.
Right.
I'm sure there are plenty of developers that are out there thinking these ideas and thinking risk and thinking innovation. But I mean, when you get down into the business of it, video games are just so damn expensive to make and produce. I mean, when you're trying to convince somebody on this crazy idea that nobody's ever done before to give you sometimes tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, And a lot of people just don't want to take that risk.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird, though, because if you make a game like NeverDead and it has all this jank in it and people don't respond to it, then it's almost like the innovative mechanic gets buried under all of the jank. So if people are looking at it and they see, you know, this game didn't sell well, so it must have been the innovation that boned it instead of, you know, the jank everywhere, they might be like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that because... so it's almost as if they can't afford, if they're going to try something innovative. It's kind of weird in that sense. But when you look at
Rebellion, I'm guessing Rebellion, I don't know. They don't have the budget of Epic for Gears. Right. I'm just going to guess that. If they want to make a shooter, how do they compete with Gears if they're going to make a third-person shooter? And it's like, what if we do something completely different? And that's when you run into troubles, but it's also, that's your highs and lows. Right. But if you just like take it and we're going to make a standard cover shooter, then you're going to get blown out of the water by a company that's already sunk $100 million into this property.
How annoying is it? This is very annoying to me. So maybe I'll bring this up. Like, how annoying is it that you've got, you know, these folks that can print money, like Blizzard or Rockstar or people like this?
Nintendo actually illegally prints money. That's what they do. Out of their DSs. Like, you can hit that
seen them do it, and it's. I mean, I wanted to say something, but I don't know.
But they gave you some of the.
Who am I? You know.
Yeah.
But the point being, like, these are the people that have the most cushion should they fail at their risk to just move on, and they don't. Blizzard doesn't innovate ever.
They iterate. They iterate very well.
They iterate extremely well, though, and that's my point. Like, and granted, Rockstar innovates, but does it in different ways. Like, I think they do it in more of the social kind of aspect of their games, not social like between players, but like the social commentary that you see. Like, only Rockstar, I think, could have really pulled off and made something like the Ballad of Gay Tony sell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so there are attempts.
They do good things with empowering the player, too.
Yeah.
But Blizzard's been innovating in other stuff, though, like, you know, the Diablo Marketplace.
Benito, I just realized that I forgot to introduce you completely.
Whoa!
Benito Gonzalez is over there. I completely ignored him running the machine. Continue on.
Well, I mean, Blizzard's trying to innovate in those other spaces, though, right? Like the way they're doing their auction house and all that stuff in Diablo 3.
But that's not really innovative.
They have innovated in the...
They've taken free-to-play and implemented it in a game you have to pay $60 for. No. Congratulations, Activision Blizzard.
I will say Blizzard has innovated in the online games as service space, arguably better than anyone else.
But that's the business spape. That's Blizzard.
Blizzard,
you know,
Blizzard marketing, Blizzard business is good at innovating. Blizzard developers take old ideas. Okay, there's two.
I don't know if we should disparage them for innovating in the
This is not necessarily an insult. Okay, though it is for me because I like innovation. But like last year, you had. I mean, didn't StarCraft come out last year?
StarCraft 2 came out.
So StarCraft last year comes out, and then Archon comes out.
Archon
comes out
last year. Yeah, Blizzard. StarCraft was the year before. Archon was.
Archon is this time manipulation RTS that's insane, and nobody can even explain it. And Blizzard wouldn't touch it with a 20-foot pole because they're terrified of that. Like, we need those kind of games, though, and Blizzard will not deliver.
I agree.
That. Yeah.
And it's kind of sad because, like, then you get these poor developers of Archon, which is a game that, as much as it wasn't necessarily always fun to play and as infuriating as it so often was, I so totally respect that game with an insane amount of energy because they did something that shouldn't have even worked and made it work. The fact that they did this time manipulation thing, and you've done time manipulation in games, but you've never done time manipulation like this.
I haven't played it. Is it anything like Braid?
No,
that's my only touch point.
You're fighting an RTS like against an army in the past, present, and future at the same time, and you switch
all at the same time.
And it works.
Okay. I remember
this is an actual game. Like, Blizzard wouldn't touch this.
I remember I was trying to explain this concept back at the Game of the Year discussions, and just a room full of people just scratching our heads like,
Chris Waters' eyes were bleeding.
And it's just like, we don't care. 7.5. And that ended the discussion.
I gave that a 6.
We gave it a 6.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
But no, so we like innovation. That's clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
In games like SoulCalibur and Final Fantasy, were those games hurt because they didn't innovate?
In a sense.
Would they have been better? Could they have been better?
Well, yeah. I mean,
and do you think a Final Fantasy player wants innovation?
Whoa! Well, if we answer that first question,
Okay, I'll answer the second question first, actually, because yes, Final Fantasy players want innovation. Because you know what? If there's one thing you cannot accuse that series of, it's mechanical stagnation. In the sense that, generally speaking, you get a very different game every time.
You don't have to couch this. This is the most changing. Franchise, undulating. Every single entry in the franchise, the core entry,
it's got carryover,
completely different from game to game.
You know, except with the exception of something like 10-2.
Well, no, like
which is even pretty different from 10,
all the way to to 13 or 14, I guess. All of those games are completely different from the last. It's
Are they now?
insane.
It's like I can see how they would have a different veneer, but are the core underlying mechanics different?
Yes,
Completely different
very
battle
different
system,
from
completely
different battle
way.
systems, different type of exploration,
Yes.
different everything. You know, there are chocobos and there are this and there are that.
Yes.
But, you know, but
So this game is this franchise is good for innovation.
it is good for innovation, and that. And,
Yes.
but so I'm going to go
It's because
back.
they have a different
then.
developer every single time, though. That's one of the reasons why.
Yeah,
They keep giving it to different people. Tri-Ace made X2 or 13.2.
yeah, and so I'm going to go back and like kind of address the rest of the stuff, which is like, is it made worse for lack of innovation? Yes, in a sense. I mean, and that's the. You know, I respect 13 a lot. I liked it a lot more than a lot of other people did. In the sense that I appreciated that they were doing something new and different. I think the problem, I mean, 13.2 is an interesting kind of lumpy game.
I despised 13.2, but you can go on.
Yeah, it's an interesting lumpy game because they went through the checklist. They said, we're gonna look at every complaint people had about 13, and we're just gonna do this. We're gonna throw all this on top and all this stuff. It's like, hey, you thought it was too linear. Here's a bunch of towns. You didn't like having shops. Here's your shopkeeper, Chocolina, crying out at you with her awful, awful voice and stuff like that. So they, but the thing is, like, when you make a game like that, you lack like that kind of creative vision that makes for the best games. And so they herd players. But sometimes I don't want developers to necessarily listen to what we want and what we think.
We're usually wrong.
The stuff,
Usually.
the
It's
best
reactive.
games, and I say this constantly about, this is why I love Demon Souls, and this is why I love Vanquish and games like that. It's like, the best games are those that we didn't know we wanted until we had them.
Yep.
Not the ones that we thought we were dreaming up that we wanted, and developers gave it to us, and it's like, what's this shit? You know?
Yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
not that Final Fantasy 13-2 is shit. It's actually a very good game.
Disagree.
You can feel free to disagree.
And actually, I just want to lay that out. So this is a personal pet peeve.
we
Final
go.
Fantasy 13.2 is a beautiful, gorgeous. The art direction on that game is peerless. I'm going to go ahead and say. The story on that game, the voice acting on that game, the narrative in general is god awful. Like God, I wish I forgot.
I don't even know
I had,
if this is a risk what you're saying right now. I think people agree with that. That game has got great art and great.
I just can't. I
Great
can't
combat.
understand why. Oh, I don't know about great combat.
It
does have a great combat
really
system.
good.
When I
turn-based
played
combat.
this game for about 5 hours. I didn't hit anything other than the A button and the RB button.
13.2 dumped it down because people thought 13 was too hard, which is when
okay.
you listen to the detriment.
I did not play 13.
But the combat system, the mechanics they made is
But I
It's
guess
really neat, yeah.
the point
It's
I wanted to make
interesting.
though
It's
is
different.
is that this game looks beautiful.
oh yeah.
Why don't they take that and put in a story that isn't just so ham-fisted it's embarrassing?
This is one of those things where you get a game that's incredibly well executed for what it does, and the question then becomes, is what it does enough, or did they simply polish a turd?
Yeah.
And what's funny about these games, and I really liked 13, and I like 13 too, but the question is always, like, if you don't like what it does at its very core, like, you're just not going to like it, because what it implements, they took their vision, whatever that might mean to you, or their lack of vision, and then they completely polished it up to a shine.
Yeah.
The thing
Well,
is,
isn't the problem with 13.2 is it doesn't have a vision? 13 had a vision that it strictly adhered to, and 13.2 is a combination of different mechanics that don't fit into the same game.
Yeah, I mean, 13.2
Like,
is basically
you need a
like,
vision.
here's 13, here's the basics of 13, here's our basic combat mechanics.
Here's our
and stuff
world,
like
here's
that.
our-
Yeah, our world and combat.
And so, and what we're going to do now is we're going to address we're going to check off all the
Yeah.
things.
But that's not how you make a good game.
and that's what kind of
Is that how you make a good
focus.
sequel?
See, I don't. What they try to do with 13.2 is like beyond the scope of what you can do in that short of a development time. Though they did in 18 months or something.
Yeah.
Like you can't flesh out an open world game like that.
Well, and it's funny because people keep asking me, is 13.2 a better game than 13? If I were to look at it on paper, like if a game was not a complete experience, but just a collection of features, then I would say, yes, 13.2 is a better game than 13 because it does all these things and because it improved all these features that needed to be improved. Is it a better experience? I would say no. It's not actually a better experience for fixing all those things.
It doesn't know what it wants to be.
Yeah. And ultimately that's another pet peeve I have, and we'll talk about that with another game that I've recently played at another time about games that don't know what they want.
Is
to
it
be.
next week?
It could be next week. I could discuss this next week.
I will be on the other side of that because the game's awesome.
Okay. But okay, so
the question you asked him before was misleading when you said would it be better if it was innovative? Because that's
I don't know the answer to that question.
we have no
because-
you have no idea.
I guess I may be incorrect in assuming or thinking or characterizing Final Fantasy as not innovative. To me,
Oh
I
my
guess
God.
I always see, I don't know the franchise very well, and I look at the things it does, and they all just kind of look very
Just
similar
look
to me.
at like ignoring MMOs because let's ignore those 10 to 12 to 13. Those games aren't even.
Yeah.
Those games aren't even vaguely similar.
I just started
mean, it's
replaying
crazy how
12
different.
actually,
Yeah.
because I always think that's like kind of the unsung, like sort of masterpiece. I don't want to say masterpiece, but it's like kind of the unsung like diamond in the series to me. And it's amazing what a different experience, number one, that it is from 13 and 13-2. But it's also amazing to me how good it is and how well it stands up. And not just from gameplay, but like from an artistic perspective. I think 12 is much more interesting artistically than 13 and 13-2. Even though 13-2 has like this incredible variety of different places and environments, I just think 12 just stands up so well.
12 is a pretty ridiculously awesome game.
I don't know.
So
Anyway,
Maxwell, let's bring this discussion to the fighting genre.
Okay.
SoulCalibur, I played a lot of, and I played several previous installments, and I can say that there is nothing innovative in this game for the fighting genre.
I mean,
And is it hurt by that?
Like I said, SoulCalibur V definitely has some new mechanics that aren't necessarily new to the fighting genre. I wouldn't. How to phrase it?
I mean, it's interesting for a fighting game. It's because people who like SoulCalibur 5, they want to be able to use the skills that they have developed in other, installments in the franchise, and at least, feel like this feels like a SoulCalibur game.
I would say that the fighting, like the core fighting mechanic, doesn't necessarily hurt from it. I don't feel like I need to be doing something wildly different in this game. I will say that there are areas within fighting games in general that I think could be innovated
They need
to help the genre grow and become more broadly acceptable.
Two
Pointing at me.
words.
What do you
Two
got?
words. Motion.
Control.
No, not so much with
Two-
the
Oh no! Looked at me when I
words.
said, "Like, no, I'm an old
Voice
fat man. I
control.
don't want this
No,
happening."
no.
I wanted to go punch.
With the voice
punch.
do this, just like yeah.
Let's turn it into
I
a
want it all
workout
voice.
game.
I want to sit down on my butt and say
Oh, you just want to
Punch.
Xbox
win.
punch that guy.
Do a Shoryuken. No, Shoryuken. Shoryuken.
Shuri.
Say the hurricane kick one.
Tatsunaka.
Tatsubaki.
Tatsumaki Senpu Kyaku.
There you go. That's fine.
Whoa.
But no, I think Street Fighter actually does a pretty good job at introducing new mechanics.
Yeah.
We've been looking at Street Fighter Cross Tekken a lot recently.
I've been looking at Street Fighter Cross Tekken. That introduces a lot of
New
new.
stuff in there, yeah.
There's a lot of new and interesting things. One of the big features that they keep talking about and that Ono-san has talked about for future fighting games is this idea of customizing your fighter, building some sort of being able to put your fingerprint or your impressions on your fighter, either by modifying their stats or modifying what types of moves they can use, and just sort of having this repertoire of like skills and abilities, and then applying them to existing fighters to
It's
make
like the
each
Call
of them
of
more
Duty
unique.
loadout, right? It's like the Call of Duty loadout,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
Basically, so like with Street Fighter Cross Tekken, that manifests in the gem system, which are these tiny items that you can apply to each character, and they confer small stat bonuses, like a 10% increase to defense or attack or something like that. In other games, I know Ultimate Marvel, they had an update that came out not too long ago that introduces the Heroes and Heralds mode, and that mode is like the extreme amped up version of gems, because you have these cards that you apply to your fighters that give radically different effects and abilities. Like some of them allow you to parry like you would in Street Fighter 3. Some of them let you go invisible. Some of them change different properties of the game. So I feel like Capcom right now, they're experimenting a lot with how they can allow players to modify and customize their characters.
without breaking the game,
Without
I
completely
imagine.
destroying their game.
Well, it's kind of also, it's interesting to go back to what we were saying about Blizzard, because it's like Capcom, it seems like, has the money to do the innovative stuff, whereas Namco Bandai may not. And can we fault them for not innovating or for playing it safe?
Well, again, I mean, games are expensive and they gotta make a lot of money, and it's just easier to look at the established rules and conventions and just say, let's grab a couple of those, plug them in here, see if it works, and if it does, great.
In Namco's defense, they actually went crazy with this in 2010 because they had Majin,
Majin and the Forsaken Kingdom.
and Enslaved, which is Enslaved is an instant classic. Majin was cool, but these games both bombed, and they were both unique.
Yeah.
So I mean, once you take a risk and it fails, what are you gonna do? That's what EA did with like Mirror's Edge. It's like it failed, and it's like, now we're gonna go back to being safe.
This actually, we'll get back to that because I want to talk about that in relation to THQ. But what were you saying, Kevin?
No, I was just gonna say, but at least you do have programs like EA partners, and you still have like independent developers out there that still manage to get enough money to make interesting things, and you get games like Shadows of the Damned and stuff like that. So, and you know, here's the other thing too. It's like I feel like there are a lot of these indie developers that are coming up with these really insane ideas about awesome stuff that can do, but they also have a much better handle on their means.
Right.
And so
they understand what it means to work within your scope.
Right. And so they have smaller projects, and that core mechanic, whatever that they're doing, becomes a much more centralized thing in a lot of those games. But then they're able to like kind of iterate on that one thing. But because they're working, a lot of the times they're working in 2D, or they're working in ways that allow them to sort of do something interesting, but still not having to spend inordinate amounts of money to do it.
Would we rather have a lot of those types of innovative games, as opposed to these giant constructions?
I mean, for me
They're more
personally,
fun.
yeah, they're definitely a lot more
That's
fun
it.
and interesting. I mean, for me personally, yes, I would love to see more of these polished indie gems.
What
as they were.
if EA made 5 polished indie gems as opposed to one giant Battlefield 3?
Are you asking me?
What if they made 5 indie
Tom's
shooter
answer.
gems instead of one giant Battlefield 3?
Obviously, that would be preferable, and
Yeah?
it's
But
like
would it
the
be as
chances are
profitable?
if they made, because everybody knows 2008 was Dead Space and Mirror's Edge. One of those took off.
Yeah.
And the other one didn't.
Dead
Dead
Space
sells more than 1 million.
I would say Dead Space is a moderate success.
It sells more than 1 million.
It does sell more than 1 million. I don't know.
Success.
1 million is no longer the benchmark for
That's
getting
not
money
bad.
back.
If you introduce 5 new IPs, there's a chance that 2 of them will take off.
I feel like 1 million you might break even on a game like
Maybe
Dead
with the
Space.
first one, and then the second one it's cheaper and easier to make.
Right.
It's I don't know. I mean, yes, I would much rather EA does that instead of making the same old sequel crap over and over.
Yeah.
I would like to see some kind of like a trickle up effect where maybe like an indie developer, they can take a core concept or a core idea, they can polish it to just a perfect shine, they can release it out there, and then hopefully a larger developer could look at that and say, that's an interesting idea.
That's what
Is your name
Valve
Gabe
does.
Newell?
Yeah, I was just gonna say. I mean, that's what Valve does. Is they do
Kim
find
Swift
these.
or Gabe Newell inhaled Kim Swift, and then we
Right.
got Portal.
That's true.
Yeah.
Like
That's true.
that's what happened.
we need more
That was
of
totally
that.
an HR violation.
And
by the
whatever
way.
Turtle Rock was, I mean, they consumed Turtle Rock, and we got Left 4 Dead, another innovative. This is what
I think they shot out Turtle Rock later. Like it kind of passed through them completely.
But this is still what Valve does. They
Passing of the
understand
rocks.
the merits of innovation, and this is why they're.
Well, and they also
best
work on a
publisher.
platform that I would argue has a greater chance where, you know, you're in a situation where if it's not, you know, if it is a slight failure, that there's less risk than if you're releasing a game on consoles on retail shelves.
Yeah, and to kind of get back to the point you made before the show with sticking with an IP, do you think we'll get a NeverDead 2? Do
I
you
hope
think
so.
we'll get an Enslaved 2? Realistically.
Enslaved? Oh my god! I would be so happy for an Enslaved too, since it's one of my favorite
Because
games.
they laid down the good mechanic, and now it's almost their
we
is it
talked
their
about
duty
this,
to follow that up?
We talked about this earlier, and it's like, because I mean, 2 games that I think are just flawed but great. Assassin's Creed and Mass Effect are just these games that are like, they had obvious problems.
Yeah.
And the developers stuck with them, and then we got like really good sequels that improved on them. And it's like, can you imagine if we kept getting that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what made Ubisoft stick with Assassin's Creed? Like, just more developers have to do that.
I mean, in fairness, Assassin's Creed was a giant success. That sold
I guess.
wildly more than what they were expecting.
Yeah, I
for
mean,
to
it
sell.
wasn't as big as the franchise has become, but yeah.
It definitely.
Mass Effect was also a big success and outsold its sequel, but still, it's like it wasn't so massive that you need to stick with it. But I'm really glad that they did, because those games were flawed and they fixed a lot of the problems with them. I know Kevin's like dying that I said Assassin's Creed is
No,
flawed.
I totally get that. Well, that's how I feel about Borderlands. A
Yeah,
lot
the
of the
sequel to
time.
Borderlands is going to be like,
I'm really looking forward to Borderlands
I mean,
2.
and it's
first
funny
Borderlands
because
is so flawed. But
I
it's
don't even
good.
really like Borderlands. I know that that's kind of sacrilege, but I feel like Borderlands puts too much in the hands of the player to make their own fun and doesn't do enough to provide the fun of its own accord. So my thing is
Which
like
is a growing trend.
Yeah, but Borderlands 2 is like one of my most anticipated games because I saw what this could be and what this is going to be. And that makes me excited.
And I think games need that the sequel to reach the potential. I mean, I think it's just heartbreaking that there's not a sequel to Nuts and Bolts because that first game, they nailed what was innovative about it, and it's awesome, and it's so well executed. But the rest of the game couldn't live up to it.
But that doesn't mean that we want these to then become endless sequels
Yeah,
and then suddenly
I know.
become what
Right.
Assassin's Creed is sort of in danger of being, which is it's just so much Assassin's Creed that it's losing what makes it special.
Well, that's what happened when Uncharted came out last year, because 2 was a huge improvement over 1, and then 3 is at best as good, but it's worse than 2. And people are kind of like, well, now what? Because you've already
Where do you
reached where
go
you can
from
go.
here?
Like that's why they have to dump Uncharted and go to something else.
Right. Well, I don't know if it's a dumping issue. It's
No, they have
just,
to dump it.
Oh, they have to dump it.
They have to dump it and move on. The Last of Us sounds awesome, and I'm so glad they moved on to it.
It does sound good, but it is kind of interesting because a game like Assassin's Creed or Uncharted, you've got these yearly installments, whereas Final Fantasy is not a yearly thing.
Well, and that's why the expectation
Skyrim
grows
is
higher
not
and
a
higher.
yearly thing.
When it's that long, I think the expectation grows somewhat that
We should talk about the difference between Elder Scrolls and Final Fantasy. Elder Scrolls does not reinvent itself. It's pretty safe sequels for 5 years. And Final Fantasy, 5 years is a completely different game every
Right.
single time.
Right. Yeah, they definitely work with a template going into an Elder Scrolls game that you don't have when you're working with a Final Fantasy game. But I do,
Other than the JRPG tropes.
right. I mean, there are definitely
Yeah, but
tropes.
they're pretty different.
Yeah.
But
That's why 8, for instance, is kind of crap, because it's different, but I just didn't like it. It didn't speak to me.
yeah,
I don't like that game. Sorry.
you don't like 8?
No, it's the one that I really didn't like.
Came
Well,
after
10
7.
Well, yeah, but 9, I adore 9.
Well, 7's the one that's now popular to hate because blah blah blah. It's the one that gets all the most love, and so the core people are like, oh, Final
But
Fantasy 7 sucks.
how do you feel about these two massive publishers? We got Bethesda and Square. One of them innovates, and one of them is just like polishing the same thing over and over and over again. Like, is that? What do you think about that?
It's kind of interesting because they're two. I mean, it seems like it might be a Eastern-Western thing. Like Eastern gamers are looking for something, and Western gamers are looking for something.
I don't know that I agree with that.
No.
No, I don't know. I mean, I would suggest actually that.
Shut up, Magrino. You're wrong.
No. I'm saying that I think that, I mean, just not too long ago, I mean, a lot of Japanese developers were just coming right out and saying, we're guilty of passing on the same BS over and over and over again.
That is true.
Pokemon Company.
And that's one of the great things. I mean, you can argue whether or not any given Final Fantasy is the best or is even good or whatever, but you couldn't make the argument that they're incredibly similar to each other. I mean, maybe you can say that the story tropes and stuff like that and character tropes are all very similar
Well, it's
to each other.
easier when you look at
but-
Final Fantasy. It's like, what's your favorite? And we all have something different to say. With
Yeah.
Elder Scrolls, it's like, what's your favorite? It's like
The most recent one.
Skyrim was the best.
Yeah.
It's the best one.
And
I mean,
before
some people
Skyrim
like,
came out, it was
some people liked Morrowind more than Oblivion, but generally speaking, it's like, well, it's
like
the
each
newest
one is just going to be better than the last because they're just improving
It's the same
what's been
basic game with
done.
better graphics and slightly more accessible and stuff. But Final
Expanded
Fantasy,
and-
it's like, well, my favorite Final Fantasy is different than yours because they're all of equal value with different strengths. And I really appreciate that Square is willing to tear down their child every single time and build something else up.
But the question is, I don't know. I mean, in some senses they're doing that, but in other senses they're really not building on that. I mean, they're doing stuff. And I mean, even when you look at 13, okay, so it had a great new battle system, and it was interesting because it was linear in a sense. But, on the same token, it wasn't really that any of that stuff was new. It's just that it was unexpected. Like, there's always that,
Well,
there's
it's new
always
for
something
them.
right.
They don't change everything in the industry. They change their franchise, which is really interesting.
But I don't know if continually changing is the same thing as necessarily having a really amazing creative vision each time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if those two things necessarily correlate, if you know what I mean. Like, it might be different from the last Final Fantasy, but does that mean that it's truly unique or innovative? I don't know that that's
I mean,
the same
They don't
thing.
but the games are unique and innovative. Like, there isn't anything quite like 12. There isn't anything quite like 13. There's definitely nothing like 13.
The only places
kinda
where where the change is good, it seems like, for this franchise is in the art direction. Like, it seems like each game, the world they build is beautiful, but then how they populate that world is not good, that they change it so often. It's like they really need to spend more time thinking about the world itself beyond what it looks like.
I read an interesting article yesterday from Christian Nutt at Gamasutra. And if you're listening to this, go to Gamasutra and find this article.
But also come back.
But also come back. Yeah, don't go away. You can read while you listen to us talk.
Right.
But it's really interesting because it has some great arguments about why he feels that Final Fantasy 13 2 and in general Square has been kind of a failure of late, and points out a lot of interesting things. But one of his arguments is hubris, is that Square kind of exists in this like cocoon.
Okay.
And which is a great Final Fantasy 13 reference, by the way. But that Square that I made up just myself. But that seriously, like, they live in this cocoon, and so, you know, on one hand, we're getting games that really aren't like exactly like other games in this genre, but at the same time, it also shows that they're not really existing in the real world. And not playing other stuff that might inform them of what could make for better storytelling.
Right, but if we're saying that they're not informed, earlier you're saying their games aren't necessarily innovative, they're just different from other Final Fantasy games. That means they have to be playing other stuff, right?
You would think so, but I do get the argument, at least, that, you know, it comes back to that thing I said about polishing a turd, which is that they come up with this idea and then this is what they do, and then they just shine it up. The question is whether or not what they did from the very beginning is really worthy.
I think that the only core Final Fantasy game that stumbled was 2. I think you can make a case.
You're going to go all the way back to 2.
Final Fantasy 2 is so good.
No, Final
it
Fantasy
was not.
4. No, we're talking about 2, not 4.
Two.
I think you can make a case that 1 through 13, if you ignore the MMOs, 1 through 13, because I don't know MMOs, were all really, really good in some way except for 2, which sucked.
Okay.
So
I cannot speak to 2.
I don't think that they polished it.
Mostly because I don't even know if I was alive when they made 2.
I played the Game Boy remake and it sucked. But everything else is, I don't know. I have a lot of respect for what they do, even if they don't always like their games.
All right. We're going to move on. I want to get to at least a little bit of news this week. Mostly because I want to talk a little bit about THQ. Do you guys know much about what's going on with THQ?
Not good things. They fired 175 dudes today.
So... I have a feature or editorial on this that I'm going to post later this week. But THQ, I feel like, is a pristine example of how not to be a game publisher in 2011, 2012.
That's so sad for them.
I know, right? But they've been getting it wrong since 2006.
That's their slogan.
Getting it wrong since 2006?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like this is a fact, like the game industry, the retail industry peaked in 2008. Like you can look at NPD numbers and that's wholly true. THQ is following the trajectory of the retail industry. It's like they have completely ignored the subtle shift.
The mobile, the free to play, the Facebook, all the trends.
I don't know if it's a trend. I feel like it's... A trend implies fad.
Oh, maybe no. Fad implies fad. Trend implies this is where the industry's going.
Just the direction of the industry to this online service as product kind of where people are making money these days. Like if you look at a publisher like EA, Activision sold itself to Vivendi to get in on Blizzard, which is the kingpin of MMOs. EA has invested super heavily into building their own digital distribution platform. They are, for better or worse, an innovator in the whole post-release space with the online pass, the season pass.
They were the first company to do the online pass.
And everybody picked it up.
So the season pass, I believe, was Rockstar. I could be mistaken, but I think
pretty
that
sure
LA
they
Noire
did it
was
first with Madden NFL.
Maybe. That was a weird one. Yeah, but EA innovates in ways that we don't like.
Right. and I feel like even Take-Two is recognizing that, hey, this is a huge priority, and they've definitely been slower than EA and Activision, but they definitely recognize it. THQ is where EA was at in 2008, where EA felt like, oh man, if we just ship Mirror's Edge and Dead Space and Dragon Age, we've got all these awesome boxed product IPs, and they're going to sell like hotcakes, and we're just going to continue making money. Now, THQ is saying basically the same thing. with games like Saints Row, Warhammer, Darksides, Company of Heroes, UFC, Insane. It's like they still are not getting it that if you need to, if you want to compete, if you want to survive in this industry in this day and age, you cannot just ship a big new IP. Like in that sense, new IP is just killing them.
Wow. You see, Nintendo's actually adjusted. I mean, we saw last week in a stockholder meeting.
Yeah.
They talked about DLC for Mario Kart and Mario, and they just released Pushmo.
They're another example of a publisher that was late to the party, but has finally been like, oh my god, we are getting left behind.
They were also really early in the other part of the industry segment split, where the motion gaming and the family gaming and the social gaming.
They did lead them.
They were the leader in that, so you have to give them credit for that.
That is true. Yeah, and it's just kind of interesting because, again, it's like THQ was looking to Nintendo and the fabulous success of the Wii Balance Board or the peripherals that Activision and EA got in on with like the U-Draw tablet. And time again in THQ's history since 2006 with like Juiced and Stuntman for starters, and then you've got other like corpses along the way like Chaos Studios, the Homefront people, Big Huge, they bought and then almost immediately sold off. It's like they just kind of go after these big hits and just swing and just completely miss the ball completely.
Yeah.
I was kind of running the numbers. THQ was pretty much at the top of its game in its 2007 fiscal year, the end of March 31st.
Well, that's also what had a lot of licensed stuff it doesn't have anymore, because that's when it had Pixar and that's when it had WWF, right?
Those were licensed properties that were big in the early 2000s. And
but they don't have Pixar anymore, right?
No, Disney has reclaimed a lot of those properties. But no, that's a good point also, where, THQ is just like, okay, this is the way that business worked for so long, and they're just like not adapting to the way the game industry. I mean, granted, like it was a pretty subtle shift. Like there weren't many people who made that initial connection that the online space was the way to go. EA and Activision being like among the few.
So if we just like crown Valve as the great
and Valve, right?
Because Steam
was so far ahead of its time. When did that was like 2002.
It was all so broken when it came out.
That is a perfect example of innovation. You ship the innovation, it's broken, it's janky, but holy
then,
shit, if you give it a chance to grow.
And that's like the big,
I could be wrong.
The big joke in this industry, because it's funny, is the hats in Team Fortress.
Yeah.
That was laying the groundwork for this free-to-play stuff and like people wanting to play just for stupid stuff. And this is what.
And in fairness,
I really like Valve. If you can't tell, I respect everything they do, even though I don't like it always.
In fairness, the hats they kind of grew out of the virtual currency or virtual items that's big in South Korea with all their free MMOs. And
but you can see Valve
Facebook.
is clearly understanding. I mean, Dota 2 is just gonna. I mean, that could be bigger than everything that THQ has done in the last decade. Like that's
easily
combined. I mean,
I totally agree.
Because League of Legends is pretty big. I don't know if you guys have heard of this.
It's League of Legends, and that's another game that it started off. I think we gave it a 6.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's I want to say something about that.
Oh, go for it.
I can. Which is like this came at a time when we reviewed games as what their retail box was, as opposed to their strength as a free game or whatever. So the retail box came out. It had a bunch of things that were to come soon. And part of the value of what you got in the retail box was basically currency for things that you could not yet buy. So the big problem, and the fact that there were only 2 maps and blah, blah, blah. So all the core stuff was there for a really awesome free game, not for a game that you spent money up front for at retail for things that came later. Yeah. That made the retail box a very poor value, which was the crux of the written review. Because at the time, we didn't review free games. Yeah. We only reviewed shit that comes in a box. And in terms of the shit that came in a box, that really
was some bad shit.
It was it was just a bad value.
It was actually mediocre shit.
And you had a great core product delivered to you when paying money for something that you could also get for free that wasn't really complete.
But
League of Legends wasn't complete.
Yeah.
And that was really the thing with that. So, but it has nothing to do with League of Legends, like the core gameplay, which is really fantastic. So, and of course the really awful communities that build themselves around these MOBA games.
It's not the most like embracing community.
No,
and you try to play the Dota stuff. It's you will
guarantee you the people playing Dota 2, and no offense to you guys that play the game, but will probably be the most awful people ever.
So I'm hoping I'm hoping that From makes a Dota game because there is no better community than the Dark Souls community.
Did you read that?
They are so nice.
I'm blanking on the game director's name.
I know they are. It's crazy.
But he was like, we might not make a sequel to Dark Souls because people were complaining about the frame rate.
He also said something about Dark Worlds, lowercase W, but you heard it here first. Dark Worlds,
the Dark
capital
World.
W it's coming. Yeah, they have to keep making that, but I mean, they need to make. Of
course, people are complaining about the frame rate. They just didn't do a good job about the frame rate in certain areas. I mean, it's just.
I just like the mentality that I like that. I mean, a perfectionist mentality will kill you, but I like it when somebody else has a perfectionist mentality.
What are the companies don't understand?
All of the Japanese publishers.
Wow.
Namco Bandai. Capcom is Sega. Don't get it. Nintendo, Sony does.
Nintendo's exempt
Sony's more of a worldwide.
Any kind of criticism because they print money.
Nintendo is getting on board. I would say the people that are still in the dark are the tier 2 Japanese publishers.
Okay, so it's basically just like this handful that gets it.
Yeah,
it's a handful of Americans. It's like Activision, EA, and Valve.
Yeah.
I think
and Microsoft,
Sony and Microsoft.
Microsoft get it. Sony, I'd say, get it. Nintendo is I would say Microsoft and Sony get it. They get it in a very broader way.
Do you know what I feel like a lot of these tier 2 Japanese developers or publishers are doing?
Tier 2.
I think what they're but I think what they're trying to do is like the way they're trying to like get stuff to sell is to make what they think Western audiences want. Hence Ninja Gaiden 3, or what have you.
It's all reactionary.
Devil May Cry, the new Devil May Cry or whatever. Like I don't know how good that's going to be or not. But I feel like the whole idea is, what Western audiences want is this. And then so they just try to do that. That's Final Fantasy 13 was Square saying, what Western audiences like linearity.
That's true. Binary domain is clearly part of that.
Yeah. And so I feel like that's kind of where the failure is coming because, I mean, honestly, and I have an open mind about Ninja Gaiden 3, but nobody really has good things to say about it. And it's because it's not Ninja Gaiden. It's a developer saying this is what we think people want, rather than giving us what we didn't know we wanted until we had it. If that makes it comes back to that. But that's what they're trying to do to
having a forward-looking vision.
Those games is just by this is what we think people want, rather than reinvigorating marketing or the way that they approach the business. Yeah,
it seems like they're just stuck in this one way of thinking that they need to innovate or they will die, as they like to say in the business community. We're going to move on. That wraps up our discussion for this week. 10 years ago this week in reviews. You guys ready for this?
I like this part.
This was a little bit of a slow week 10 years ago. 10 years ago this week was kind of balls. 7.7.
Okay.
This game is the PlayStation 2 sequel to the PC action-adventure game that Psygnosis released several years ago. In it, you play as Rin, a female warrior who shares a magical bond with an ancient dragon named Arko.
I know the name.
Dark forces have begun to gather in your realm, and the two of you must open 4 magical gates to bring Arko's dragon brethren back into the world to drive out the evil.
It's Drakan.
Drakan!
That's it.
That's correct. This is the sequel. Do you know the...
well, the first one was Order of the Flame. This is like Ancient Gates.
The Ancient Gates.
Wow.
Kevin knows his female
I think Psygnosis is great, and I loved Order of the Flame. It's funny, like that was one of my first early kind of online...
Maxwell's just like, what the hell?
Online games?
I'm looking at the box. There's a sweet picture of a lady riding on top of a dragon.
What else do you want?
What I learned,
it may as well be a unicorn.
Yeah, seriously.
Well, I played it online too. I mean, it was great because you got on the back of dragon and you flew around and stuff, and you like, Arok was your dragon, but you also, like, I learned online in that game, like, if somebody's up against facing a wall, that means don't attack them because they're typing something in chat.
Oh, really?
Like, I know that seems like a really strange thing, but that's like the first time I ever learned that bit of online etiquette was that game. So of course I remember Drakan.
And I think actually Surreal Software made this.
Really?
I don't know.
Psygnosis made the first one. I don't know.
Might have made it, and this was a Sony game.
According to Wikipedia, it was Surreal Software.
Oh, very interesting. And GameSpot.com.
And GameSpot.com.
Let's see. We're going to move on to... I've cut out so many segments. Twitter. Hi, people out there. Last week, I said that you could win Greg Bear's Halo Primordium, The Forerunner Saga, if you told me accurately the first punctuation mark in this book, which I read. I got one submission that was incorrect. Nothing else. So as a punishment to you all,
Oh no.
I'm going to do another dramatic reading and post the exact same question tomorrow. You asked for this. Random. Her true name, ... only to her mate, her life partner, ... or to her sworn guardian, ... And he whispered it in my ear. I resumed the ritual storytelling, only vaguely aware of the blue-eyed machine still hovering over the long grass. Just as I finished, I saw that the old man's eyes were mostly closed and had fallen back the tiniest bit, unmoving within his skull. I stayed by him, listening to the last tick of his breath, watching the last twitch of his limbs. ... So, I'm going to post. I want to know what the first punctuation mark in this book is.
I know.
I know what it is. I've read it several times. Let me know. GameSpot HotSpot is our Twitter account. I will be giving a lot of free stuff away through GameSpot HotSpot. Basically anything that I don't want, I will give to you out of the kindness of my heart. So follow us. You don't have to. I don't care. But I at least want to get rid of this piece of... Well, Greg Bear, Hugo Award-winning author. Terrible book. No, it might be. Housekeeping. We are blowing up in Guam. Listenership is up 50% in Guam.
Did it go from 2 to 3?
Last week we had 2 weeks, or 2 weeks ago we had 2 Guamanians listening. Last week 3 Guamanians tuned in.
Are we sure it's Guamanian?
Yeah, aren't they Americans? They're just Americans, right?
No, well they're, I guess. They're Americans in the same way Puerto Ricans are Americans.
Yeah.
Did you try to arrange
That may have been mildly racist. I love Puerto Rico. I have never been to Puerto. I'd like to go to your fine country, Puerto Rico. I don't know how many Puerto Ricans we have. Only 3 Guamanians though. So thank you from Guam. Write in, and I'll try to get a meetup between you all. It might be fun. You might like these people. But possibly not. I don't know. I think that does it for this week. Kevin Van Ord, thank you for showing up.
And thank you to the people of American Samoa as well.
Right. We love you if you're in American Samoa and Guam and Puerto Rico.
Thank you for inviting me.
Maxwell McGee.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thomas McShay.
Hey.
That does it for us. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Hotspot out.
Who the heck writes
Oh, shit. Release the dogs.